everybody, it's Rob again. It's time for another Member Talks. This one is an exciting one. I know I say that all the time, but each one of these are actually exciting to me. I'm excited though, because I got to meet for the first time our guest today, Michael Sharkey. Michael is he's a funeral director, embalmer. He's an attorney, or let's call it a litigation attorney. How's that? He got all sorts of
specifically
alphabets behind his name too. Esquire, CCO, CFSP, all sorts of stuff. So Michael, thank you for coming on to Member Talks. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and hello to all my funeral service peeps out in the great state of Washington.
You are in Minnesota, is that right?
I am. Yep, Minneapolis here.
Okay, Minneapolis, good deal. And we kind of talked briefly before we started this. When we were looking in the background there, I was saying, geez, Minnesota, I figured there'd be snow, but you're telling me that it's going to be like 95 degrees where you're at coming up here.
Yes, yes. You can't ice fish today. No, don't do that.
No, you're not going to last too long, will you?
No.
Michael, thanks for coming on again. I really wanted to get you on here. I've been watching kind of your progression on Facebook and some of the social media sites. I've been very interested in learning from you, seeing what your posts are and things. And I really thought it'd be fun to get you on here and just talk and introduce yourself. How did all this begin for you? I mean, you started as a funeral director and then became an attorney, or vice versa?
I started as a funeral director. So I did not grow up in the funeral business per se. I grew up in the floral and greenhouse business. And so I had been, from the time I was old enough to hold a bud vase or to hold a door for my mom or my dad to do a delivery at the funeral home, I'd been going in funeral homes. And because of the business relationship that my parents had with the local funeral directors, there was nothing strange about funeral homes to me or funeral directors to me. They were business people just like my parents, and they were always dressed nicer than anybody else in town. And so I just had really positive interactions. And then my parents, and I grew up in a very, very small town in the middle of nowhere up north of Green Bay, Wisconsin. And my parents sponsored the obituaries, the noon obituary reading on this like 4-watt AM station. And it was, for all your funeral flower needs, contact Sharkey's Floral and Greenhouse. And so for me, the president of the local bank would pass away, or the local drunk, either way, and my mom would say, "Oh, this is going to be a big funeral," and so it was a positiveness. It was just a business for us, and so I ended up having a lot of respect for funeral directors, and I graduated with a degree in biology, and I had worked on the old school term as a diener at the anatomy department. Where I went to school. My job was to take care of the cadavers for the human anatomy class. Yeah. And I was a December graduate. I had a job lined up come May, and I was delivering a funeral for my parents in early January. And the local funeral director said, "You ever think about funeral directing?" And I'm like, "Yeah, actually I have a lot." And it just started from there. So I ended up going back. I did my apprenticeship. You can do that in Wisconsin. Then I went to University of Minnesota Mortside program, and then I ended up in law school. And I lived in a funeral home, and I worked in a funeral home the whole time I was in law school.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So
now go back, because something caught my attention there. Something that you said. Your parents sponsored the noon reading of the obituary on the radio.
Yes. I don't know if they do that anymore in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin or small town USA. But yeah, it was for all your funeral flower needs, call Sharkey's Floral and Greenhouse. And my mom would listen to the obituaries to make sure that they that she knew who had passed, and she could then, being a small town, she kind of gauge how many flowers it was going to be. Like I said, if the town drunk died, she'd be like, "Oh, every tavern in town is going to send flowers," and so she'd be all excited. And to me, so it didn't seem strange. And yeah, so we listened to the obituaries that we sponsored.
Well, that's great. I've never heard of that. The reading of the obituary on the radio for some reason.
It might be it's I'm sure it's a small town thing.
Well, that's cool. That's cool. So what was it then that drove you from, well, not from, but what was it that drove you to want to go from funeral directing to litigation, to be an attorney?
There's three things I always wanted to do in life. I always wanted to be in the Marines, and I did that. I always wanted to be a funeral director, did that. I always wanted to go to law school, did that. I don't have a whole lot left now. I need a new bucket list. So, it was one of those things where I had put off going to law school. You get involved in funeral service, and it becomes its own thing, it's its own lifestyle. And it ended up going to law school. Frankly, I was married to a funeral director at the time, and she pushed me to go to law school. She's like, "You really need to go to law school. You can do better. You can do more things in funeral service with a law degree." And frankly, she was right about that. So I ended up going to law school at the University of St. Thomas, and then one of my classmates, soon after I graduated from law school, one of my classmates from mortuary school, who was a trade embalmer, ran afoul of the Department of Health and called me, and I helped the individual out with that controversy and got a good result. And it just started from there. I'm like, this is a thing.
It is a thing.
And my funeral home clients like that I speak funeral.
Yeah.
There's nothing any of my clients has done or will do that I haven't done myself. So sure. There's some street cred, I guess, is what you would say there.
There you go. Well, you're right. It is absolutely a thing, and it's kind of a unique thing. You could say it's a niche market, pardon the pun, but it really is. A funeral litigator or somebody that specializes in funeral law, or at least practices funeral law. Very few people out there that are doing that.
I can't claim to be a unicorn. That might be a little much, but I'm unicorn-ish.
There you go.
So, yes, I do. So what I do is first of all, I'm general counsel of the Wisconsin Funeral Director Association, Minnesota Funeral Director Association. And then I represent cemeteries, crematories, funeral homes, individual funeral directors, and sometimes families in whatever mortuary or cemetery law needs they may have. Mm-hmm. And then I also serve as both an expert witness and as a trial consultant. And I can do that anywhere in the country. I've been, both coasts and down south for that matter, and then here locally too. So, and what I bring to that is, as a litigator, as somebody who tries cases, I know what juries and judges are looking for in an expert witness, because I have to hire them myself in my own litigation cases. So I bring a little extra to the table for that.
Now, besides being an expert witness, are you able to practice in other states besides Minnesota and Wisconsin?
So I'm licensed in Minnesota. Okay, I'm licensed in Minnesota and Wisconsin. I do consulting work for any business that needs it anywhere in the country, but I can't actually go into a courthouse outside of Minnesota and Wisconsin because I'm not licensed there. Although I am in the process of getting a South Dakota license and an Illinois license. So hopefully it's a slow process. Very slow process. But by the end of the year, I hope to be able to offer my services directly to the good funeral directors and cemeterians of South Dakota and Illinois. But yeah, I can, I have, for example, I had a pretty big cemetery outfit out in New Jersey, New York. I've done work for them. But they understand that I can't go into court. I can help them understand the rules and regulations, but I don't go into court.
Is that reciprocity into those other states or jurisdictions? Is that normally a slow process, or is that a COVID related?
Well, COVID slowed it down a lot, but it's normally a good 6 to 8 month long process anyway. I mean, I got to go get fingerprinted. Okay. They really run you through the to get a bar license. They run you through the ringer, as they should.
Right.
But I can, in a situation in which a funeral home or cemetery or crematory needed help, we do have something in law called a pro hoc vice admission, which means I can associate with a locally licensed attorney, and then their license goes on all the pleadings, but I'm on it too.
Okay.
It would be like a funeral director crossing over into another state where they don't have a license to conduct a funeral, but there's a local funeral home that sends a funeral director with a license to be there.
Right.
It's a very, very similar concept, just more paperwork because we're attorneys, so we do that.
No, that was something that interested me because I just finished the process of, I hold multiple licenses myself for funeral directing as well as insurance. And I just finished the process of getting my insurance license in the state of California. But really, for the most part, when it comes to insurance and funeral directing reciprocity, for the most part, it's pretty simple. Just fill out an application, send them whatever fee it is, and wait.
Yeah.
So I was fortunate, but yeah, I would assume if you're doing something like having to pass the bar and that sort of thing, it could be a little bit more difficult than
it is
proven you've been a licensed funeral director for a number of years.
Yeah.
So what I don't, and without going into detail, because I don't want to ask it in a way that comes across as I'm asking about details about past cases, but what typically are you seeing when it comes to funeral litigation? Is it problems with permitting? Is it problems with licensing? Is it problems with families that may have a misunderstanding of what or why something happened? What are you seeing?
So I think I need to break that down into on the litigation end. It's things like a wrongful cremation. The funeral home was supposed to bury Mr. Smith and cremate Mr. Jones, but they did it the exact opposite way. Obviously, that's a loss. That's a big lawsuit when that happens.
Yeah.
So things like that. Botched embalmings, oftentimes on a ship out, or I guess you might say a ship in which, and there's some great trade embalmers. Do not get me wrong. There are some really, really, really great trade embalmers. But in one of my presentations, I don't know if you've ever heard of the old Earl Shives. I will paint any car. I will paint any car, any color for $99.95, right? And because it's super cheap, and then that's the kind of paint job you got. And if you go and you're like, well, who's the cheapest trade embalmer I can find? No offense to cheap trade embalmers, but you're gonna get what you get what you pay for it. And I have a client that's a trade embalmer. He's like, yeah, I'm by far the most expensive trade embalmer in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and he's proud of it. But I've seen his bodies. He's got a lot to be proud of. You will never have a problem. So things like that. Lost cremains. I'm sorry, I said that. Ooh. Lost cremated remains.
You said a bad word. We're going to have to edit that.
Right there. Yep. I said that. I let it slip. See, I'm so comfortable with my own peeps. I'm like, yeah, let that.
Hey, this is Washington State, man. We say that. We say that out here. When 80% of your people that you're serving, 80% of your families that you're choosing for cremation, cremains is a word that gets used pretty loosely around here.
I apologize to anyone I have offended by having slipped on that. Oops. So, losing the urn happens more often than you think. Things like, let's see. Now, on a somewhat smaller issue, that's the big litigation stuff, right? The stuff that's expensive. On a day-to-day basis, probably the number one thing I deal with between Minnesota and Wisconsin, because as general counsel for both the MFD and WFDA, we have a system set up where members can call me for legal advice.
Sure.
And it's paid for by the association. And so what happens is the number one thing I deal with is families fighting over who has the right and duty to control the final disposition.
Oh, yeah.
And the whole and every funeral director that's been directing for more than like 3 minutes has heard the tale of, well, I have power of attorney, so I'm in charge. Well, no, you're not. Well, mom loved me more, so, and I was at her deathbed, so I'm in charge. Well, no, not necessarily. Or, well, my sister Sally, she's estranged from the family, so I'm in charge. You don't have to talk to her. Well, no, not doesn't work like that. And so that is like the number that every single day. I get a call from somewhere between Minnesota and Wisconsin with a funeral home needing help with families fighting over who has the right and duty to control the final disposition. And sometimes I get the call and it's like, Shark, the family's in the arrangement conference room and they're screaming at each other. What do I do? And I love helping funeral directors with that kind of stuff because it's like, it's like being Winston Wolfe from Pulp Fiction. I'm here to solve your problem, right?
Yeah.
I'm not here to make you feel good. I'm here like, okay, what are the facts? Boom, boom, boom. I have the law in Minnesota and Wisconsin memorized, as I should, as you would expect me to. And I'm like, okay, let's go through the progression and figure it out. And I have done one of the services I offer is put me on the speakerphone in the arrangement conference room and I'll explain it to the family and they can be as mad as they want at me. I don't care. Sure. Right? Yeah. Like, I don't care if the Jones family thinks that I'm a complete jerk because I told them what the law is. They're not going to hire me. I'm going to hurt anything. It isn't going to prevent me from buying new shoes, but it takes the pressure off the funeral home so they can be mad at me rather than being mad at the funeral director. And then the funeral director can just sit back and be like, obviously I have to take the advice of our attorney. He's the expert on this. So. He's the expert on this. And then you can sit there and be a little bit funeral director smug too. I'm like, yeah, I told you so. But that is the number one thing. And again, if you've been directing for more than like 3 minutes, you know that families are not getting easier to deal with. They are getting harder to deal with. And everybody's on on Google during the arrangement conference trying to figure out why they should be in charge. And almost every state has a statutory scheme that you can go through. One of the things I advise funeral directors to do is take your state statute on who has the right and duty to control the final disposition, print it out, laminate it, and it's right there in the arrangement conference with you.
There you go.
And one of the things I tell funeral directors when I put on presentations is I'm like, use the law, the black letter law, it's right there so that the family is mad at the law and not mad at you. And you can show them that. It's right here. You're not making it up. It's right here. And they can be mad at that statute or that rule or regulation rather than being mad at the funeral home. And that, my friends, is worth watching the rest of this podcast right there. Just take that.
Yeah. I'm actually glad you brought that up because I wanted to talk with you about that. It's been said 50 states in the union, we have 50 different sets of rules. It's true. Many of the rules are similar, but different. Some of them are completely different, but for the most part, they're somewhat different. In Washington, that statute that you just talked about in Washington is called RCW 68.50.160, the right to control disposition of remains. And we preach that. I mean, that is just like you said, that is the number one law that everybody needs to know that's sitting in front of a funeral home, because you need to be working with the person that has the right to control those remains. Now, the very first paragraph of that, and I wanted to ask you this in comparison to Washington, for Minnesota and Wisconsin, the very first paragraph of this says a person has the right to control the disposition of his or her own remains without a pre-death or post-death consent of another person. A valid written document expressing the decedent's wishes regarding the place or method of disposition of his or her remains, signed by the decedent in the presence of a witness, is sufficient legal authorization for the procedures to be accomplished. So basically they're saying, if you sign your own authorization, and I'm going to say it's a disposition authorization. We typically get into the I guess lazy habit of calling it a cremation authorization, but really it's a disposition authorization. And in Washington now, as you know, and most of our listenership knows, we have essentially 4 choices for disposition. Actually, you could say we have 6 choices: burial, cremation, alkaline hydrolysis, natural organic reduction, removal from the state, and donation. So those are essentially your choices that you have. I guess my question is, in comparison to Washington, does Wisconsin and Minnesota also have that in the statute that says, number one, you can control your own disposition just by signing a document that says, when I die, I want this to happen? Can you do that?
Absolutely, yes. Can I be all history nerd on you?
Sure.
Okay, so okay, history nerd alert, but the idea that you have a right, you have a right to control your own disposition actually goes back to ancient Rome, and Roman soldiers they'd make out wills. I mean, wills are not a new thing. They're actually old Roman law was fully developed with wills, and part of a Roman soldier's will is they would actually discuss, usually they would be cremated, and oftentimes their bones, the cremated bones, because they didn't have the kind of cremation that we have, they couldn't achieve those temperatures.
Sure.
But those would be sent back in an urn to, a family area where they grew up, whatever. But it was recognized under ancient Roman law that a person has a right to control their own final disposition. So right. It goes back. So it's more. It is a law that is actually, it's a concept that is well more than 2,000 years old. Modern day. So in Wisconsin, it's actually codified, and that's Wisconsin statute 154.30 sub D, like 6 or 7. 154.30, and it's actually written out. The state has said you can use this exact wording, and it's absolutely ironclad. That doesn't mean you have to use that wording, but it's laid right out in the statute for you, nice and clean. And if you're a funeral home that's deviating from that in Wisconsin, I would say don't do that. The state already they gave it to you right there. Now, across the Mississippi River into Minnesota, we also have that. And in Minnesota, it's that would be MnStat 149A.80 sub D1 and sub D2. And that says basically that you have to have a written instrument, it has to be signed, dated, and witnessed, and there has to be some instruction. I want to be buried, rings the bell. I want to be cremated, rings the bell. So yes, it's definitely, and it can be done. It can be done on a napkin.
Yeah.
I mean, in Minnesota, it can be, and for that matter, if you do it properly, you can write it on a napkin as long as it's signed, dated, has the instruction, and witnessed. So don't do it on napkins, guys. But you could.
Well,
so you know what? I hope we get to the point where every single state eventually recognizes that. So
that's something that is in Washington as well. You can write it on a napkin if you wanted to, and the wording that's in there is just basically says, so long as it says this is what I want, and it's witnessed, and I always say dated, but just to make it doesn't actually say dated in the RCW. But the truth is, if it's signed, dated, and witnessed in Washington, it becomes a legal binding document. I think we get held up on the fact that we try to use more of an at-need authorization to authorize somebody's cremation on a pre-need basis. And that's where it gets really confusing, because with the at-need cremation authorization, you're talking about what happens to the remains afterwards, what happens to the the implanted devices, what happens to who gets to return, who gets to receive the remains. I think we get tied up. A lot of that.
Little nuanced things, and they're important for the cremation authorization, but they really don't advance they're nice, I suppose, to have in an authorization for final disposition, because the more specific the instructions, the easier it is for you, the funeral home. but most of them do not require such specificity. There's just an instruction.
And
I
know that
I want Rob Goff to be in charge of my body when I die. Okay, there we go.
Yeah. So that actually, and I'm going to kind of sidestep it a little bit, and I apologize because I want to really kind of focus on Washington a little bit. And I know that you're not as familiar with Washington's codes.
I'm not licensed in Washington.
I get that.
Yeah.
But just to kind of go into that, you just said something there. When I die, I want Rob Goff to control my body. That's basically making Rob Goff a designated agent of that individual. Is that right? When I die, I want Rob on a general basis. I realize it's not
exactly. The problem is the term agent is a legally used word, and it can have several different meanings depending upon the context. So, okay, so using our example then, I, Michael Sharkey, upon my uncertain, untimely passing, want put Mr. Rob Goff in charge of my final disposition. Do you become an agent? You become an agent with a very small a, because all I've done is empowered you to make a decision regarding, am I going to be buried, cremated, organic disposition, donation, right? That's all I've really done. I haven't made you the agent to take care of, sell my house, take my Bitcoin account. I don't have one, but that kind of. So I want to be very careful when we use the word agent, because it can have a very broad meaning, or it can have a very, very just specific meaning. So without having the Washington statute in front of me, I'm very much guessing that it only empowers you to make the decisions regarding that, and wouldn't give you any. You can't sell my pickup or something.
Sure. Let me
or my Harley.
Yeah.
You're not getting your hands on my Harley. My nephew already has, like, that's mine. So
I got dibs.
Yeah.
I did. So let me actually restate it then, because I do get what you're saying with agent. I'm going to read it word for word. And really where I'm going with this is to prove a point that pre-planning, not necessarily pre-purchasing, but pre-planning is the best thing that a person can do for themselves and for their family. That's kind of the point that I'm trying to get to. But so this right to control, we said paragraph 1 talks about you could sign it yourself. You can do it yourself. Paragraph 2 says prepaid. It talks about prepaid prearrangements. Paragraph 3 talks about the right to control disposition based on a number of different people. And then that number of different people starts with designated on your military documents that if I die in war, this is who, kind of what you talked about with the ancient Romans. If I die during battle, this is who I want to take care of my remains. From there, it goes to section B, which is, I'm sorry, I'm looking at it right here. Let me find it. Or section A, section B, the designated agent of the deceased as directed through written document signed and dated by the decedent in the presence of a witness. Then it goes to surviving spouse. And that's where a lot of people have issues that I've been hearing about. You'll have a person, here's a prime example. When I die, I want to be cremated. I'm going to designate my next door neighbor as my designated agent to control my disposition, because I don't think my family's going to be able to do it, or whatever the case might be. 20 years goes by. I've had a big battle with my neighbor. We don't talk to each other. We built our fence between our house 20 feet tall instead of the standard 8 feet, so we don't have to see any part of their house. My spouse comes in to make my final arrangements. We've got to be asking the question as funeral directors, is there a designated agent that's signed and witness that hasn't been canceled or whatever the legal term is, turned off, for example? Because if there is, even though I've been married to my spouse for 40 years, I can't really take your direction. I have to take the direction of the designated agent based off of the RCWs that are on our laws.
Yep. If you're going to designate somebody to be in charge of your final disposition, it better be somebody that you know you're going to have a positive long-term relationship with.
Yeah.
And maybe your neighbor is not the right person, or maybe they are. But I actually have dealt with that issue. Probably the most interesting story I have is what happened was a gal was dying of. She knew she was dying. There was no question that she would be passing. You know, she was terminal, and her husband, who was present for everything and there, and from what I can tell, very nurturing, had some severe mental health issues. And she, understanding that, knew that he would not, especially when you add in grief of a spouse passing away, he would be absolutely incapable of making a decision. So without telling him, she put her brother-in-law in charge through a officially executed and properly executed authorization for final disposition. And I got involved with it. And the husband, you know, again, in mental health issues, and the wife was aware of it. And then you add in the grief, and he was just an absolute hurricane to deal with, including, you know, threatening to come shoot up my office, all that good stuff. But yeah, that does happen with, and oftentimes there's a reason why somebody says, you know, maybe the person who has the statutory right is not actually the person that I want. For example, here's a great example. It's, you know, June is Pride Month, right? Okay, so, and I've dealt with this before. You have somebody who, you have a member of the LGBTQ community, right? And yet the parent or parents are a member of maybe some religious doctrine that is incredibly anti-LGBTQ. Well, you know, there's a situation which you want one of these to prevent, you know, we litigated a situation in which something very much like that happened. And that was just a few months ago. There was a young member of the LGBTQ community committed suicide and had written an authorization for final disposition for the individual's girlfriend. And the parents were extremely conservatively religious, and they did not recognize the transition of the individual, and they certainly didn't recognize the relationship. And it got into a full-blown battle in probate court. And fortunately, I feel that it was resolved by the court in a proper way that paid proper and due respect to the decedent's wishes.
Good.
So
good.
But yeah, it's there for a reason, and it's a great tool.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and it goes back to, and maybe it's because I'm kind of biased to this in the fact that, you know, I'm a huge proponent of pre-planning. Maybe it goes back to that, but boy, I would tell anybody, if that's the statute, and that's number one in Washington in particular, where it's number one on the list, it's the very first thing that says who has the right to control disposition. Well, I can do my own. Go out and do it. Don't do it on a napkin, but even if you do it on a napkin, put it somewhere that people are going to have access to it, that they're going to know if they find you somewhere, hey, this person wanted X, and here's the authorization.
You make a really good comment about access. So if you take your authorization for final disposition and you put it in your safe, right?
Where no one can get it.
And you pass away and you're the only person that knows the combination of the safe, right? Well, that's a problem, right? So yeah, it should have it on file at the funeral home. Which obviously, being as pro-funeral as a person could ever be, gives you a chance as a funeral director to interact with that family. Yes, we have a file, we have your pre. We'd be happy to keep it for you. I mean, that's just good service to families, so they're not looking all over. Meanwhile, there's a fight brewing amongst who should be in charge.
Right.
What if we can't find it? Tony wants to be in charge. Billy wants to be in charge. No, funeral director can say it's right here. Here's the original.
Yeah,
we've kept it. It's a value-added service you can provide your families.
my favorite is when they tell me, people say, oh yeah, we've got it all, it's ready to go. Well, where is it? It's in our safe deposit box at the bank. Okay, how's anybody going to access that? Because guaranteed you're going to die on some holiday weekend where you cannot get access to a death certificate for anywhere from 7 to 10 to 12 to 30 days that you need that access to get into the bank with, to get the authorization out that says what we can do for you.
Where did Dad put the keys?
Yeah. So yeah, definitely put it somewhere where it's going to be easily found and be able to be used. I want to switch gears on you just for a second. You talked a little bit about embalming and embalming litigation, primarily based around poor embalming.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've heard in the past, and I know no funeral director or embalmer wants to hear about it because it means more of what they don't want, and that's paperwork. But one of the things I've heard in the past is one of the best opportunities to protect yourself as an embalmer is to have a properly completed embalming report on record, readily available when the questions come up, that you can pull that out. What would you say to that?
Amen, brother. So it's okay. So as the vast majority of my work is on the defense side, right? Mm-hmm. I'm defending the funeral director. I'm defending the funeral home. I'm defending the crematorium, right? So, and but full disclosure, I assure you that back in the day when I was embalming and it's 2:00 in the morning and you're running on caffeine and yesterday's donuts, right?
Right.
Did I not fill out embalming reports? Yeah, guilty. Statute of limitations is run. But in 2021, you have to be doing them, and I know that people don't like them. And like I said, yeah, it's 2:00 in the morning. You really want to fill this out? No, I know you don't, but you have to. And here's why. So let's say we have a claim of a improper embalming, what I like to call botched embalming, meaning somebody put a half a bottle of Plasd opaque and into 4 gallons, shot it, and said that's good enough. I'm tired, right? Yeah, little extreme, but they're out there. So okay, so when so let's say that you do, God forbid, have a situation in which you get sued for an improper embalming. If you have an embalming report that I can go through, it does a couple of things. Number one, it's evidence that you did what you were expected to do. Now, many states require them, not all states do, but as an industry standard, you need to do them whether you're in a state that requires them or not. And yeah, I said that, and probably some people are hissing right now, but as an industry standard, you need to do it, okay? It protects you. This is a legal concept called CYA. You can look it up. It's not in Black's Law Dictionary. It's not in Black's Law Dictionary, but if you type CYA, you'll figure out what it means. And it's very important for that, my friends. So the first thing it does, establishes you did an embalming report, you filled it out, and what it does is, one, it says, okay, this embalmer is competent and was operating within the industry standard, right? Okay. And by the way, for those of you like, don't call funeral service an industry. It's a $22 billion a year gig, guys. It's an industry now. All right. Yeah. We have our own podcasts. So
there you go.
Okay. Stop with the hate mail. But so that's the first thing it does. The second thing it does is it gives me the opportunity to examine you, Mr. Embalmer, Ms. Embalmer. Tell me, what did you observe with the body? Well, you're never going to remember what you observed with that body, right? Sure. You've done hundreds, if not 1,000 since then. So you can look back and, it's called to refresh your recollection. That's a terminology we use. And you say, oh, yes, I estimated the individual's weight at this. I noted that there was skin slip on the upper right extremity. I used, I mixed this much fluid. I did this. I did a co-injection, whatever it is. I raised these vessels. I did the drainage from here. I used, X ounces of fluid, cavity fluid up, X ounces of cavity fluid down, that kind of thing. It allows me to establish to a jury that, you did your due diligence. You did the right thing, because if you don't have that, what's going to happen is, if I'm on the plaintiff side, I'm going to say, well, how do I know that did you not know? Did you not care? It makes it look so sloppy. And the other thing is that a lot of people don't realize is that depending upon who your regulatory body is, I'm going to say the Department of Health, and I realize that there's different, examining boards, but we got 50 states, so we're just called the Department of Health as a regulatory body for funeral directors / embalmers. You don't want to find yourself in a situation, if you're in one of those states where they're required and they come in and do an audit, and it happens, at least in Minnesota it happens, in which you don't have them, because now you're in violation, and then they start really looking for stuff.
Well, sure. Yeah. Once they
so there's not just a civil litigation part of this. There's also the licensing and potential fine part of it too, on the Department of Health regulatory body. So please, please, please fill out your embalming reports. It's a best practice, and it's a best evidence to cover you if, God forbid, there's ever a lawsuit. And by the way, here, value added, if you're getting a ship in, please re-aspirate, please. Okay, I shouldn't have to tell you this, but Sharkey says, if you're getting a ship in, please re-aspirate.
Yeah.
It can keep you out of a lot of trouble.
Amazing what pressure can do on airlines. Well, kind of going along with that, one of the things that, and I don't want to add or put words into your mouth, but one of the things that I would say, besides filling out your embalming report, fill them out immediately. Don't, just because it's 2 a.m. and you're on caffeine and donuts from yesterday, don't go take a nap or catch up on your sleep and then come back the next day and do it. And, try to remember everything that you did. Take the extra 5 minutes and fill it out in its entirety with as much detail as possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I've seen embalming reports that are just like Post-it notes of the amount of bottles. We use 3 bottles of cavity. We use 2 bottles of this, 2 bottles of that, whatever, just slapped onto a blank embalming report. And it's like, oh, wow, that's going to work. I hope that Post-it note's on there when you're sitting in front of the judge.
Exactly. Yeah. One of the things I'll say is, when it comes to the idea of, avoiding litigation, or again, some kind of regulatory Department of Health, funeral director examining board, embalmer examining board problem, is I have yet to see a case in which I had to defend an embalmer for over embalming a body. Mm-hmm. Okay. That doesn't mean that you can't over embalm bodies, and it doesn't mean that over embalming doesn't occur and that it doesn't cause problems, especially in the extremities and the face. All right. But the chances of you ever getting sued or ever having action taken against your license because you push a little too much fluid, the chances of that are just minuscule. It's always an under embalming. Okay.
Right. Right. That's a good point.
It is. Okay. We got, the body was a lot harder to dress, and we did have some dehydration in the extremities. Okay, you can handle that as a funeral director. You can deal with this, guys.
Sure.
As opposed to the other end of the spectrum, we were dealing with a body that you didn't get fixation of tissues, all those things. Oh yeah, but they're really easy to dress. No, guys, no. So you won't get, if you decide, that extra bottle of arterial fluid, or I'm going to put a little extra cavity in. It is cheap insurance, and I'm not on the payroll. I'm not on the payroll of any fluid company. All right, call me. But it's a little extra fluid is just good insurance for you. It really is.
Amazing that $2 or $3 bottle of something can save you a $2 or $3 million lawsuit. And it's sometimes it's as simple as that. Sometimes it's just as simple as that. Just one extra. And I agree with you. I think that I think part of the problem that we're seeing, at least out here, of reduced amounts of embalming being performed, one of the biggest reasons is because of a poor embalming experience previous. I saw what happened with so-and-so, and I don't want to see my loved one look like that. And part of that experience is, one, fear of, oh my gosh, what happens if I put too much fluid into this person? Are they going to dehydrate? What are we going to deal with? It's like you said, well, we can dress them easier with less. I hope so, because you might be dressing them 3 or 4 times as they, leak through the shirt type thing. So,
yep.
But, well, Michael, this has been informative. It's been entertaining too. I've enjoyed talking with you. It's not too often that you get to sit down with an attorney, especially one that goes by the name Shark.
Call the shark.
That's right. And have fun with it. It's not too often. People usually have that idea, oh my gosh, I got to call the attorney. This is going to be a nightmare phone call. But you've made it a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed getting to know you. I can't wait to see you on the circuit, because I know I'll run into you somewhere on one of these.
I'm so happy to be back out on the speaking circuit.
I bet.
I was just out in South Dakota for their convention. On Monday, I'll be in Wisconsin, Colorado this year, New Jersey. I'm more than happy to go put on my little dog and pony show to conventions, and I get to meet new funeral directors and embalmers, which is my people. So and talk funeral and caring about the families we serve. So,
well, just remember, Washington's not all that far from Colorado. So
I would love to come out and see you guys.
We'd love to get you to
get
come
me out
on
to your
and talk with us
convention.
one of these days.
Yeah, get me out to your convention. That'd be cool.
Yeah. Cool. How can we get in touch with you? I know that you said that Minnesota and Wisconsin have that opportunity as members of their state associations to call you and get some advice. But if somebody just wants to bounce something off you, just say hi. How can we get in touch with you?
So probably the best way is email. So my email is Sharkey. So that's MSHARKEY at cvmmlaw.com. So that's Charlie Victor Mike Lima Alpha Whiskey.com. So Sharkey at cvmmlaw.com. And
that must be held over from your Marine days, huh?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, a little military alphabet there. Yeah.
Well,
but this has been fun, and I want to say, hi to all of my funeral peeps out in podcast land. I have so much respect for what you guys do each and every day, the heavy load the undertaking that you have on your shoulders, and how every day you go out there with renewed energy in this quiet, respectful way to serve your families. It's you're the unsung heroes of our society.
Well, thank you. That's great to hear, and I know that people are going to hear that all over the place and be very heartfelt. They're going to know that's, I want to say true, but they're going to know that it's heartfelt. And
it is. I know the strain and the stress of the noble work that we do, and being an attorney is easy, man. Being a funeral director, that's hard.
Yeah, it is. And maybe that should be a topic for an upcoming show, of just all the back stuff, all the back scene stuff that people don't actually know that we do. Yeah, that's a good idea. We'll see. Hey, Michael, thank you for coming out. Thank you for joining the conversation, and thank you for your service. We appreciate your service to our country. We appreciate what you're doing now to help us get better so that hopefully we don't have to call on you for your service. But we do appreciate the fact that you came out and shared some thoughts with us.
Thank you, Mr. Goff, and thank you to the Washington State Funeral Directors Association. And like I said, thank you to all the funeral directors, embalmers, and funeral service peeps out there doing their good, noble work.
Yeah, absolutely. Till next time, see you guys later. We'll catch you next week. Bye, everybody.
Take care, everyone.